nostalgic era. I have just been thinking about my life, about all the things in my childhood, even the things from a couple years ago that were better. Things from the past that I just wish were still the same now. And I wanted to show you guys a couple of examples. I want to see if you agree with me. If not, this is just my opinion. But first up, we have a picture of the old Barbie movies. Now, some of you might not have watched these, and if you haven't, you're really missing out. Because the old Barbie movies were just the best. There was like Swan Lake and the Nutcracker, and this is the Princess and the Pauper, and it just hits different, right? Like they're just so good, and like Barbie Life in the Dream House just does not compare to the old Barbie movies, right? All right, next, we have gas prices. Now, I know most of you don't drive, so you probably can't relate, but I drive, and my wallet is really hurting. Gas is just so expensive, and I live in Surrey, so I have to drive out to Vancouver every single day, and it is a lot. I really miss, during COVID, the one good thing was that the gas prices were really low, and so it was like under $1, whereas now it's more like $2, and it hurts, guys, it hurts. All right, next, we have Blockbuster. Okay, I'm kind of dating myself here, but if you don't know what Blockbuster is, basically, it's a place that you would go to rent DVDs and movies. And I remember my family would go like maybe once a month, and there's 3 of us girls, and so we each got to pick a movie that we could take home. And now, you guys all have like Netflix and Disney Plus, and you can just like look through whatever you want, and there's like thousands of options. But there's just something so special about getting to go to Blockbuster and taking home a movie that you've never seen before. It was super exciting. Okay, the next example that I have is chips. This is the thing. I feel like they have really been doing us dirty, because when I was a kid, I feel like the chip bag was more full. But now, as time has gone on, there are less and less chips. Look at this, 48% air. That's almost half. And I'm pretty sure it's more than that, because sometimes I open up my little, hickory sticks. I love hickory sticks. And there's like 5 of them in there. And I'm like, what is this? This is terrible. All right, next thing that I have is the Starbucks stars. Now, Sam, I know you work at Starbucks, but this is the thing. They've changed it. It used to be 150 stars to get a free drink, and now it's 200 stars. That means you have to spend $100 to get 1 free drink. Now the thing is, I still love Starbucks, and I'm gonna go no matter what. Even if it becomes like $20 a drink, I'll probably still be there. But if it was cheaper, that would be a lot more ideal. All right, and then the last one that I have, this might be controversial. Plastic straws, I miss them. I'm sorry. I know it's more environmentally friendly, so they say, to have paper straws, but I liked having a plastic straw. These ones, look at that picture. It is disintegrated. It tastes like paper as you're drinking it. It is not good, and I vote that we bring plastic straws back. So, see, I look back at these things, and I think, wow, things were so much better then. I wish I could just go back. I wish these things still existed today. Those were the good old days. And that's kind of the theme that we have been talking about here at Archetype over the past couple weeks. We're in this series called The Good Old Days, and it's all about getting back to your best. So often we look at our past, we look at things before, maybe when we first became a follower of Jesus, and we just think, things were so much better then, why can't I just go back? And what we've been talking about here the last couple weeks is that actually you don't have to go back to experience those things. That actually right now you can access those things, and we're trying to tell you how. And so the first week, we looked at how we can get back to our passion, getting back to that fire, that hunger that you had for God. And then last week, Joe preached an amazing message talking about how to get back to your purpose, getting back to what God has called you to and designed you for. And this week, we are talking all about getting back to your peace. Everyone say peace. All right. I don't know about you, but peace is not something that I experience a lot of nowadays. We're constantly hearing about anxiety. So many people are being diagnosed, being medicated. It's this huge thing, and it seems like every other day someone else is posting about how they struggle with anxiety too, and I'm right there with them. And maybe many of you in this room, you can probably relate. Maybe you struggle with anxiety. Maybe you know someone who does. Maybe you don't experience anxiety, but probably all of us know what it's like to deal with worry, to deal with fear of what's next, of the unknown. Peace, it just doesn't seem to be in our world, right? But then if we look back at the Bible, if we read God's word over and over again, it talks about peace. Over and over again, it says, don't worry, do not fear, take heart. We read verses like Colossians 3:15, and it says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Or John 14:27, where it says, don't let your heart be troubled. And that all sounds nice, like thanks God for saying that, but how do I actually do that? How do I have peace? How do I not worry, especially when life gets hard? When it feels like everything's falling apart, when I don't even know if I can get through tomorrow. See, some of you are asking those questions. They're real questions, they're real struggles. And maybe at one point in your life, you felt like you had peace. Maybe when you first started following Jesus, you felt confident in him and you were like, no, I know I can trust him. I know God's got me and I feel peace. I feel peace knowing that I have him with me wherever I go. Maybe you've never experienced that before. Maybe ever since you were a kid, you can't remember a time where you haven't experienced anxiety. You haven't gone a day without feeling some kind of worry. And life gets in the way, things get hard, and it seems like that peace that we once had, or that peace that the Bible talks about, it's just gone. I know what that's like. So how do we get that peace? How do we get back to our best, get back to that peace that we once had? Well, I want to look at a story in the Bible. I know, crazy, to help us figure this out. So if you have a Bible, or if you have the Bible app on your phone, I want you to open up to the book of Daniel. Are there any Daniels in the room? Oh, no Daniels. You guys still got to invite your friends named Daniel. They got to be here. So the book of Daniel, it's found in the Old Testament, which is like the first half of the Bible. And it documents the time when a bunch of Israelites, God's people, were taken from their home in Israel as exiles to what was known as Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. And this group of Jewish exiles, they were taken from their houses, taken from everything they had ever known, and they were forced to live with the Babylonians and kind of live like they lived, talk like they talked, ate like they ate. They had to change their whole lifestyle. And it was a pretty sad situation. I mean, if anyone had the right to say, oh, those were the good old days, it was the Israelites, right? They had to leave behind their families, their possessions, everything that they had ever known, and now they were living basically as prisoners in this new land where they were being oppressed. So a lot of the book of Daniel, it focuses on a man named, can you guess? Daniel, but also Nebuchadnezzar, so good one. And Daniel was a Jewish exile. He was taken from Israel as well. He was taken to Babylon, but Daniel showed potential. Daniel was special. He was smart, and people became interested in him, and they started to raise him up as a leader. And eventually, despite all odds, Daniel became a chief governor in Babylon. And Daniel also had, he has this high important role, so he decides to promote 3 of his friends to pretty high positions as well. And their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Pretty cool names, right? And so you can read the story later if you want to. We're just going to start in Daniel 3. But to summarize it, King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. What a cool name, right? Nebuchadnezzar. You all want to name your kids that, right? King Nebuchadnezzar, he is the king of Babylon, and he suddenly gets this idea. He's like, I should build a golden statue. Now, I've never had an idea like that. I don't really know what the point is of having a golden statue, but he was pretty excited about it. So he starts spending a bunch of money. He gets all this gold. He hires all these people to make this golden statue. And the Bible actually says that it was 60 cubits tall, which in our measurements is 90 feet. So imagine this 90-foot tall statue that's just there. And eventually it's complete. And King Nebuchadnezzar, he's just so proud of it. He's like, this is awesome. But he goes a bit to the extreme. He decides he's going to make a commandment that when anyone hears any sort of music, a flute, a trumpet, they actually have to bow down to this statue. I mean, he loves this thing. It's pretty obvious, right? I mean, imagine you're in this kind of situation. Imagine you're at your school's volleyball game, and you're just cheering on your school, hoping that they'll win, and then all of a sudden, the team mascot comes in. Maybe they're a tiger. I don't know. Mine was a firehawk. I don't even really know what that is. But someone comes in the mascot costume, and your principal goes on the mic and says, all right, everybody, this is a holy mascot. And you are all now, as soon as this music plays, you are going to bow down to this mascot and worship. And if not, we'll kill you. Pretty intense, right? So the king, he wants everyone to bow down to this idol, and he says, if you don't, I will throw you into a furnace to die. So what would you do? Well, if you were most of the population in Babylon, you would just do as you were told. You felt like you had no other option. If we read in Daniel 3:7, it says, therefore, as soon as the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, not sure what that is, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They all just decided, you know what, let's just go with the flow. We don't want to die. Let's bow down to this idol. But there's 3 men who decide not to go with the rest of the crowd, to not do what everybody else is doing. If we keep reading, it says, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, in other words, important people, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are all men of God. They all, just like Daniel, they came from Israel. They were taken as exiles, and they lived among the Babylonians, but they chose not to worship all the gods that the Babylonians worshiped. The other Babylonians, they had different religions that they bought into, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like, no, we're sticking with our God. We're sticking with what we know to be true. And because they were friends of Daniel's, and they showed a lot of potential, they were also raised to high positions in Babylon. And so, when these astrologers come to King Nebuchadnezzar and say, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not bound down to your idol. The king knows who they are. He's worked with them. And he's not happy. Like I said, anyone who didn't bow down to this idol was thrown into a blazing furnace, just like that. It was that simple. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd have a lot of peace in this situation. I think I'd be feeling pretty terrified, probably more than that. I mean, the king is literally threatening. He's not just saying, oh, you're going to get fired. No, he's saying you will be in fire. He's being serious. I mean, this is like, when I get anxiety, I go to the worst case scenarios. This is the worst case scenario. It's about to happen. This is a situation that it's far too big for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But instead of focusing on all the things that they can't do and all the things outside of their control, what do? They focus on what they can control. They focus on what they can do. And what they can control is whether or not they will bow down to this statue. And that's what we need to do if we want to get back to our peace. Well, when you're facing anxiety, when you're in a fearful situation, you need to first focus on what you can control. Focus on what you can control. There's a lot of things in life that we can't control, right? I mean, you can't control the weather. When I was getting married, I was really hoping that it would be a sunny day and not a rainy day because we were doing an outdoor wedding, but I couldn't control that, right? It was sunny, praise God. You can't control the traffic. That's the worst one. Sometimes me and Nathan are driving to work and, we left at an early time and there's still an accident. You can't do anything about it. You're just stuck. And for you, maybe you can't control what people say about you. You can't really control whether or not you have a mean boss. You can't, as much as you'd like to, you can't control your parents' marriage. You can't control the cancer that your grandpa has. There's so many things that are just outside of our control. And for me, I love having control. I mean, I get in the car, and I'm like, I want the aux cord. I want to control the music. There's so many things that I want to have control over life, but sometimes we just don't, right? The moment I start to lose control, the moment I feel like something's out of my control, I start to freak out. I start to worry. I get anxiety. But that's the reality, that at certain points in our lives, we're all going to face things. We're all going to come against things that we can't control, that we can't change, that we can't just fix in an instant. And that's the kind of situation that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in. They had been taken from their land and exiled to Babylon, and they couldn't control that. The king had made this statue and commanded them to worship it, and they couldn't control that either. But what they could control was how they responded. They could control whether they bowed to this statue or not. See, oftentimes we're so focused on what we can't control, right? We're so focused on, well, if I could just fix this, or if I could just change this person's mind, or maybe if this situation was different, but we can't. And we get frustrated, right? But what if instead of focusing on what we can't control, we chose to focus on what we can? And what we can control, no matter the situation, no matter what you're up against, what you can control is your actions, your words, your responses. That's up to you. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they know the situation they're in. They know that they can't just convince the king to change his mind and get rid of this statue. They know that's not an option. So instead they focus on what they can do. And what they do is they refuse to bow down to this idol, which is what everyone else is too scared to do. Many times I think that the way that we think that we'll get back to our peace is if the situation is just fixed. We think, well, I'll have peace when this person agrees with me. I'll have peace when that problem is no longer an issue anymore. We think, well, if we just turn around the situation, then I'll have peace. Then all my problems will go away, but that's not it. The first step back to peace is to focus on what you can control. It's to focus on what you can control. It's to do what only you can do and not what you wish others would do, not what you wish the world was like. See, if we keep reading in the story, it says that King Nebuchadnezzar actually summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He brings them to him. And because, they're his leaders, because they're, pretty high up in Babylon, he kind of gives them a little bit of slack. He says, listen, I've heard that you've not been bowing down to the statue. And I told everyone that I was going to throw anyone who didn't do this into the furnace. But you know what? I'm going to give you another chance. So the next time that this music plays, next time you hear a trumpet or something like that, I want you to bow down. And if you don't, well, sorry, you guys are going in my furnace. But here's how the three men respond. If we read in Daniel 3:16-18, they say to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I mean, talk about bold, right? I don't think I could even get out words if I was faced with that situation. Even when they're given a second chance, even when the king says, okay, next time you better bow to the idol, they refuse. They say, we will only worship our God. They trust that God is going to take care of them, that he has the situation in his hands. And this leads to the second point that I have for you today. You need to first focus on what you can control, and then you need to surrender what you can't control. We got to surrender what we can't control. These men, they couldn't control what the king did. They couldn't just convince him that his statue was dumb. They could only focus on their own response, and everything else they had to give to God. And that's a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, we talk about surrender all the time. We sing it in our songs. We say, God, I'll surrender. You can have my heart. You can have it all. God, I just want you. It's all about you. I surrender all. And that's easy to sing, right? But the truth about surrender is that it actually takes a lot. It takes sacrifice, giving up the things that you want, your plans, your ideals, maybe giving up that sense of security that you wanted. And that's hard. It's hard when you don't know what's going to happen. And none of us like not knowing, right? I mean, you're not going to go skydiving and they say, well, we don't know if this parachute is going to work. But go ahead. I'm sure it will be fine. No, I want to know. I'm not going skydiving anyways, but I want to know that parachute works. I am not jumping out if there is even a chance that it's not going to. You know, I'm not going to buy a car. I'm not going to go to a car dealership and pick a car and they say, well, we actually don't know if this one works. We don't know if it actually drives, but you should buy it anyways. I'm not spending my money on that, right? We like to know for certain, for sure, that things are going to work out. For me, I basically only watch shows on Netflix now that all the seasons are already out, it's already done, because I just hate, I don't like those shows where something comes out every week and you got to wait till the next week to watch that episode. That's like so old school. I want to know now. I want to binge the seasons and finish it in a couple weeks and know if they're going to fall in love, know if this person is going to die. I don't want to have any unanswered questions. And when we worry, when we struggle with anxiety, the last thing that we want to feel is like we don't know what's going to happen, right? That just makes it worse. We want the answers. We want to know, God, this is exactly what you're going to do. This is exactly what's going to happen. Everything's going to work out. And then I will follow you. Then I will trust you. And we think that's where our peace is going to come from. But let me tell you, the peace does not come from knowing how things will turn out. It doesn't come from having all the control. There have been situations where I knew everything was going to turn out. I knew that things were going to be okay. And I still felt anxious. I still was worried. So instead of worrying about it, instead of letting those things take up all your thoughts, instead of taking that on yourself, what if you gave up what you couldn't control and surrendered it to God? What if you let him have that? See, when I get on a plane, I'm not worrying about how much jet fuel we have. I'm not worrying about the aerodynamics. I don't even know what that means. Or how we're going to get to our destination. I'm not worried that the plane is suddenly just going to fall out of the sky. No, I don't know a thing about planes. And it's not in my control. It's out of my hands. Instead, I trust the pilot, the person who's been trained for this. He's got my life in his hands, and I trust that he knows what he's doing and that he will get us to our destination. What if we did the same thing with God? See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had no idea how things were going to turn out. They didn't know if maybe the king was going to give them mercy and be like, you know what, you guys can go, a little slap on the wrist, no worries. Or if he really was going to throw them into the furnace. But either way, they had peace. Either way, they trusted that part, the part that they couldn't control, to God. See, if we look back at that verse, I want you to notice the words, but even if he doesn't, even if he doesn't, even if God doesn't deliver us, even if we die in this furnace, we still trust him. We still won't worship anyone else. That's a pretty scary statement, right? But from that statement, it's clear to me that these three men, they had peace. They had peace not because the situation was great, it wasn't, but because they trusted in who their God was. They had peace that whether they lived or they died, whether they were punished or not, God was still good and he's still trustworthy. See, so often I think we see peace as something that's situational. We think that if life is going great, if things are going our way, then we'll have peace. That's when it makes sense, right? But peace is not based on circumstance. It's not based on a feeling. Peace is found in Christ alone. And that's where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were getting their peace. The situation was scary, and I'm sure they had all sorts of thoughts going through their head, like, maybe we are going to die. Maybe this is the end. Maybe that's it. But they had peace knowing that it was all in God's hands. The word for peace in the original Hebrew language that this was written in, it's the word shalom. Maybe you've heard it before. And shalom, it's not describing a feeling. It's not just describing something calm. It's not describing the absence of fear or worry or problems. Shalom, to put it simply, it describes the presence of God. It means soundness, wholeness, completeness, and that's who God is. He is whole, He is complete, He is one. And it's also used to describe the way that we've been reconciled to God. That even though we're sinners, even though we've fallen short, even though we've missed the mark, and we don't deserve to be in relationship with God, He has broken down that barrier. He has made a way for us to come to Him, and now we can be in relationship, and we have peace between us. There's no animosity. There's nothing separating us from Him anymore, and that is the kind of peace that this is talking about. It's shalom. In Psalm 4:8, the writer says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." That peace, that shalom, that the presence of God, it goes with you everywhere, every day, and it's always accessible. So after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse. They say, we're not going to bow down. The king gets really angry. And he actually orders that the furnace, it's already hot. He says, let's make it 7 times hotter for these guys. And so they turn up the furnace. They bind up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so they can't escape. And they go to throw them in the furnace. And the Bible actually says that it was so hot that the flames were so much that the soldiers who threw them into the furnace actually died right away. So at that point, it would seem like the story is over, right? Like, sorry, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, thanks for standing up for Jesus, but that's it. You're dead. The end. And actually, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably thought the same thing. They thought, this is over. But if we read a little further, if we look at what Daniel has to say in verses 24, it says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, 'Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?' They replied, 'Certainly, your majesty.' He said, 'Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods.' Nebuchadnezzar, he then approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here.' So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them." Some of you, if you've been in church for a long time, you've heard this story before. And it's easy to kind of be like, oh yeah, that happened, but this is miraculous. Not only are these guys not dead, but they have no harm on them at all. They're not burned even a bit. They're no longer bound up, even though that's how they had gone in. They don't even smell like fire. They've been saved. Now here's the thing. We can look at a story like this and say, wow, God is so good. He's so faithful. He does miracles. Praise God. And we should. That is a good takeaway from the story. But what I want to emphasize here is that even if these men had died, even if things had not gone their way, they still had peace. They didn't know what we know. They didn't have the book of Daniel to read, and they didn't flip to the next page saying, oh, look, guys, we survived. It's no big deal. No, they didn't know how the story ended. They walked into this not having an answer. But that didn't matter. They had peace, and they trusted that God would do what was best. They trusted that He was with them. And He was. He's right there in the fire. And that leads to my last point for today. So you need to focus on what you can control. You need to surrender what you can't control. And you need to remember who stands with you. Remember who stands with you. You and I both know that life is not going to be easy. We may not be thrown into blazing furnaces, but we're going to face hard things. You might have already faced hard things. You might be up against situations where you think, I don't know the answers. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know why God's letting me go through this type of pain. But you're not doing it alone. You are not in the fire by yourself. You have a God who never fails, a God who always stays true to his word, and he will go through the thick of it with you. He'll hold your hand. He'll look out for you. See, as a girl, sometimes I get a little nervous when I'm walking through a sketchy neighborhood, right? You know, you go to East Hastings and you're walking, you're thinking, okay, I'm just gonna walk really fast and not look at anybody and just get through this as fast as possible. It's sketchy, right? But when I'm walking with Nathan, when I'm walking with my husband, and he's beside me, I don't feel as nervous anymore. And that's not because the situation has changed. That's not because the neighborhood is any less sketchy. There's still crazy people all around. But it's because I know I have someone next to me who I can trust, who's looking out for me. And that's how we can feel with God. You can have peace knowing that he's with you, even if the situation is hard. Even if it's not what would typically be something peaceful, you're not alone. You have someone looking out for you. And some of you need to hear that today. And whatever it is you're facing, whatever kind of battle you are going through, I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on in your life, but what I can tell you is that God is there. He fights for you. He protects you. He loves you with an everlasting love, and he's not going to abandon you. He's not going to leave you on that street to look out for yourself. He is right there with you. See, peace, it's not found in a perfect life. It's not found just when everything is going right. Peace is a person, and it's Jesus. Peace is a person. I feel like that would make a good tattoo. See, John 16:33, it says, I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So no matter the situation, focus on what you can control. Surrender what you can't. And remember who stands with you, the God who is in control. The band can come back up now.